Grandmother catches husband with nanny and does something shocking. What seemed like an ordinary family hides a disturbing betrayal. By recording everything with her camera, she proves she wasn't crazy. But no one imagined her revenge would be so powerful and so artistic. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. Eleanor looked at her wrinkled hands as she sat on the porch of her gallery. At 78, each line in her skin told a story that she had transformed into art. The sound of the guitar, played by her grandson Matthew, filled the space with a soft melody, reminding her of other times when her son Ryan was discovering his first musical notes. Her eyes scanned the space around her, walls covered with vibrant paintings, visitors walking among the works with contemplative gazes, young artists seeking her advice. All of this seemed like a distant dream compared to the life she had led decades ago. "Grandma, I composed this music thinking about your old paintings," said Matthew, interrupting her thoughts. "Those 3 canvases in the museum, you know?" Eleanor smiled. Those 3 canvases, the beginning of everything. Memories flowed like an uncontrollable river, taking her back to when she was 27, when freedom was just an abstract concept that she tried to materialize in secret brushstrokes. Back then, her routine was meticulously predictable. She lived with Richard, her husband, and Ryan, her 5-year-old son, in a house inherited from Richard's family in Silver Creek, Arizona, a small town where everyone knew each other by name. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect family. Richard worked at the town's only bank, Eleanor took care of the home, and Ryan was a happy, healthy child. But the reality inside those walls was different. "Where did you go today?" Richard would ask as soon as he arrived, before even greeting her. "Just to the market and the pharmacy," Eleanor would respond, showing the receipts she kept as proof. "And why did it take so long? Almost 2 hours away." Ryan wanted to see the fish in the aquarium at the pet store, so we stopped for a bit. Richard would examine the receipts, verify the times, mentally calculating if the timing made sense. It was a daily ritual, an interrogation disguised as concern. "Next time, let me know if you're going to deviate from your path," he would say, storing the receipts in a drawer where he kept all the others, organized by date. That drawer was the silent symbol of her prison. Every purchase recorded, every outing documented. Eleanor had become so accustomed to that control that she no longer noticed how suffocating it was. Except when she painted. The basement of the house, a small damp space that Richard considered useless, had become her refuge. It was there that she hid her canvases, paints, and brushes. While Richard worked and Ryan was at school, Eleanor would go down to the basement and allow herself to exist without restraints, even if only for a few hours. "Eleanor, are you down there again?" Claire's voice, her best friend and neighbor, echoed down the basement stairs. "I brought that coffee you like." Claire was her only genuine connection to the world. Friends since adolescence, she knew Eleanor before Richard entered her life, before she began to diminish herself to fit others' expectations. "I'm finishing something." "I'll be right up," she replied, quickly covering the canvas with an old cloth. When she climbed the stairs, she found Claire in the kitchen, serving 2 cups of coffee. Next to her was Chloe, her 16-year-old daughter, a young woman with curious eyes and a shy smile. "Eleanor," I was thinking, "Chloe wants to earn some extra money and learn to be more responsible. I thought she could help with Ryan some afternoons a week. What do you think?" The idea of having a few more hours to paint made Eleanor smile genuinely. "That would be wonderful, Claire. I could get back to some project, those paintings you hide in the basement." Claire winked. "It's about time you showed your talent, friend." Eleanor looked away. Richard didn't approve of her art. He considered it a useless pastime, something that took her focus away from household duties. One day, perhaps, Chloe began picking Ryan up from school 3 times a week and stayed with him until late afternoon. The young woman's presence brought a lightness that Eleanor hadn't felt for a long time. While they played in the yard, she allowed herself to immerse in colors without the constant worry about the clock. It was on one of these afternoons that Eleanor noticed the first change in Richard's behavior. He came home earlier, bringing chocolates, something he never did. "They're for the girl who's helping with Ryan," he explained. When Eleanor questioned, "We need to thank her for her work." In the days that followed, Richard began arriving home earlier and earlier. He brought small gifts, a handmade bracelet, a book of poetry, a CD of the band Chloe had mentioned she liked. The frequency with which he complimented the young woman also increased. So mature for her age, a pleasant presence, intelligent and beautiful. Eleanor observed with growing discomfort. There was something in Richard's gaze, a fixation that went beyond gratitude or sympathy. One night while washing dishes, Eleanor tried to talk about the issue. "Don't you think you're being too attentive with Chloe? She's just a teenager." Richard put his newspaper aside and stared at her with an expression she knew well. It was the look that preceded his accusations of insanity. "What are you talking about, Eleanor? I'm just being polite to your friend's daughter. Or is being kind forbidden? Now too? That's not it. It's nothing. You're imagining things again. Frankly, Eleanor, sometimes I worry about your mind. Maybe we should consult Dr. Paul." Dr. Paul was the psychiatrist that Richard suggested whenever Eleanor questioned anything. The veiled threat of being considered mentally unstable was enough to silence her. That night was no different. The following weeks brought more gifts, more compliments, more glances, and with them an increasingly heavy silence between Eleanor and Richard. She began to observe their interaction with redoubled attention. She noticed how Richard casually touched Chloe's shoulder, how he would come close to explain something unnecessary, how he sought reasons to be in the same environment as her. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to speak with Claire. She carefully chose her words, trying to express her concern without sounding accusatory. "Claire, have you noticed anything different in Richard's behavior with Chloe?" Her friend frowned. "Different how?" "The gifts, the constant compliments. He was never like this." Claire looked at her as if she had said something absurd. "Eleanor, he's just being kind. Richard has always been a proper and respectful man. Frankly, I'm surprised at you. I'm not suggesting anything, just it seems like you are, and honestly, it offends me that you think this way about your husband, and by extension, my daughter. Chloe is a decent girl." "Claire, I didn't mean—" "Look, Eleanor, maybe it's better if we take a break from this conversation, and I think I'll tell Chloe not to come over for a while." The door closed with a bang that reverberated through Eleanor's body. In a single moment, she had lost her only friend and her small freedom. She felt more alone than ever. That night, she went down to the basement and painted until dawn. The canvas that emerged showed a fragmented woman with parts of her body dissolving into the air, while a golden cage surrounded her. It was herself, she realized, slowly disappearing in her own home. The following days were filled with silence and tension. Richard blamed Eleanor for the estrangement of Claire and Chloe. "Your paranoia is driving away the only people who can stand us," he accused. Ryan, sensitive to changes in atmosphere, became quieter, more observant. It was on a Sunday afternoon. When Richard said he was going fishing in the creek that cut through the Mendoza property, that Eleanor decided to go out to clear her head. She walked aimlessly through the small town, greeting acquaintances with automatic smiles, until her feet unconsciously led her to the same creek. The landscape was peaceful, clear waters running over smooth stones, leafy trees offering shade, birds singing in the distance. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling a rare moment of peace. That's when she heard laughter coming from a small clearing ahead. Driven by an instinctive curiosity, she approached silently. And then, like a physical blow, the scene revealed itself. Richard and Chloe were together, embracing intimately, exchanging kisses that were anything but innocent. His hand traced the young woman's back with a familiarity that suggested this was not their first meeting. Eleanor felt her stomach turn. Her suspicions were not paranoia. They were reality. For an instant that seemed like an eternity, Eleanor was paralyzed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her hand instinctively reached for the small camera she carried in her purse, a birthday gift that Richard had given her to record family moments. With trembling fingers, she recorded the scene. Not as revenge, but as proof to herself that She wasn't crazy. Silently, she retreated. She didn't want to confront them there, not like that. Her heart was beating in a strange rhythm, as if trying to escape from her chest. She returned home in a state of numbness, each step automatic, each breath conscious. In her mind, images formed, all the times Richard had called her paranoid, all the accusations of instability, all the moments when she had doubted her own sanity. When she arrived home, Ryan was at the neighbor's house, playing with their son. Eleanor mentally thanked them for this small relief. She went down to the basement and, without thinking twice, began to paint. The images flowed from her hands as if they had a life of their own. There was no plan, no sketch, just raw emotion transferred to canvas. 3. Paintings emerged that afternoon. The first showed two bodies intertwined in soft, deceptive tones, like an idyllic scene hiding poison. The second portrayed a face divided in half. On one side, the serene expression that Richard showed to the world. On the other, a mask distorted by lies. The third was the most visceral, a self-portrait of Eleanor fragmented, as if each part of her body was disintegrating, being carried away by an invisible wind. When she finished, it was already night. Her hands were stained with paint, her face marked by tears she hadn't even realized she'd shed. She heard the front door open. Richard had returned. "Eleanor, where are you?" She slowly climbed the basement stairs, as if each step represented a decision. She found Richard in the kitchen, serving himself water. He seemed normal, calm, as if that afternoon had never happened. "Were you in the basement again? I thought you had gotten over that painting phase." Eleanor stared at him without answering. There was something different in her eyes, a determination that Richard had never seen before. "What is it? Why are you looking at me like that?" She took the camera from her purse and showed him the photo. Richard's expression instantly transformed from confusion to anger. "You followed me? Are you spying on me now?" "Answer the question, Richard. What were you doing with Chloe at the creek?" He tried to grab the camera, but Eleanor was faster, stepping back a few paces. "You wouldn't understand. You're seeing things that don't exist. As always, that was nothing. It was nothing. I saw you two together, kissing, touching. And what are you going to do? Tell Claire? Who would believe you, Eleanor? The woman who spends hours locked in the basement, painting strange pictures? The woman who's had anxiety attacks? The woman whose own husband considers emotionally unstable?" Each word was a stab, but also a confirmation. Eleanor had lived so long under that manipulation that she almost believed she was the person Richard described. Almost. "You're right. No one would believe me." Her voice came out surprisingly firm. "But I don't need them to believe. I know what I saw. I know who you are now." Richard took a step forward, his face contorted in an expression that mixed anger and disdain. "And what are you going to do? Leave this house? With what money? Where would you go with Ryan? Be realistic, Eleanor. You need me." It was at that moment that Eleanor realized he was right. She had no money of her own, nowhere to go. Richard's financial control had been so absolute that she didn't even have a bank account in her name. The realization was like a punch to the stomach. "I'll tell you what's going to happen," continued Richard, sensing his advantage. "We're going to pretend this conversation never happened. You'll delete that photo, stop with these accusations, and we'll continue our life. And if you try something stupid, I can assure you that Dr. Paul will be very interested in hearing about your new hallucinations." The threat was clear. Eleanor knew that Richard had enough influence in town to make her appear unbalanced. He had already planted that seed in several people over the years. "Understood?" he pressed. Eleanor nodded slowly, but something inside her had changed irrevocably. That night, while Richard slept, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor acted with calculated care. She began selling small objects from the house, decorative pieces that Richard rarely noticed, old books, silverware that was kept for special occasions that never came. She sold to people from neighboring towns during the few hours when she was alone. At the same time, she discovered a cookie tin that Richard kept hidden at the back of the garage cabinet. Inside was money he kept without declaring to the IRS. It was his emergency fund, he said. Although he had never shared this information with Eleanor, she withdrew small amounts, replacing them with paper cutouts of the same size to maintain the volume. With the money gathered, Eleanor rented a small space in the less valued part of town. It was an old warehouse with leaks and electrical problems, but it had potential. The rent was cheap, and the owner, an elderly gentleman who had known Eleanor when she was still single, didn't ask many questions. On the day when everything was ready, Eleanor waited for Richard to leave for work. She packed some of her and Ryan's clothes in 2 small suitcases. She took essential documents, family photographs, the teddy bear, without which Ryan couldn't sleep. She left behind the 3 paintings she had painted on the day of the discovery, along with a brief letter. "Richard, I'm not crazy, I never was. I know what I saw, I know what you did. I won't try to prove it to anyone but myself. I won't try to keep you away from Ryan. He will need to decide for himself when he's older what kind of relationship he wants to have with his father. But I can no longer live in this house, in this lie. Don't look for me. If you try to use your influence to harm me, I have the photo and other evidence stored in a safe place. Live your life, let me live mine. Eleanor." When Ryan returned from school, Eleanor greeted him with a forced smile. "We're having an adventure today, my love. We're going to a new house." The boy, with the typical resilience of children, accepted the change with curiosity rather than fear. "Can we take Pudding?" he asked, referring to the cat they had adopted a few months earlier. Of course, Pudding is already in the car. And so, with 2 suitcases, a cat, and a confused but confident son, Eleanor left behind 15 years of her life. The first days in the new space were a test of resistance. The warehouse was larger than it seemed, divided into 2 environments, one that could serve as an exhibition area and another smaller one, where they improvised a home. There were no beds, just mattresses on the floor. When it rained, they had to strategically distribute buckets to collect the water that dripped from the ceiling. The cold entered through the cracks in the poorly sealed windows. Ryan surprisingly adapted well. He transformed the situation into a big camping game. "It's like sleeping under the stars, but with a roof," he would say, watching the leaks. Eleanor began to transform the place. With inexpensive materials and a lot of creativity, she created partitions to separate the environments, painted the peeling walls, fixed what was within her reach. The main space, more spacious and illuminated, was destined to become a small gallery. Richard, as expected, did not easily accept their departure. He showed up at the warehouse 2 days later, demanding they return home. "Have you completely lost your mind? You want to raise our son in this filthy place?" "I prefer to raise him in an honest place than in a house of lies," replied Eleanor, keeping her voice calm so as not to frighten Ryan, who was playing in the other room. "This won't stand. I'll seek my rights. You kidnapped my son." "I didn't kidnap anyone. Ryan is here, safe and sound. You can see him whenever you want, as long as you let me know in advance. I'm not preventing your contact with him." The measured response seemed to momentarily destabilize Richard. He expected hysteria, not calm. "You won't be able to maintain yourself. In a week you'll be begging to come back." "Maybe, but it will be my choice, not your imposition." When Richard left, slamming the door hard, Eleanor felt a mix of fear and freedom. She knew he would try to make her life difficult, but for the first time in many years, she was in control of her own decisions. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor transformed the warehouse into a space that, if not luxurious, was at least welcoming and functional. The main area officially became a small gallery where she hung her paintings, works that for years had been hidden in the basement. She put a small sign at the entrance: "New Beginning Gallery, Permanent Exhibition." She didn't expect much. Perhaps a few curious visitors at most. The town was small and conservative. Art was not among local priorities. To her surprise, the first visitors appeared on the 3rd day. They were people passing by, noticing the sign, and entering out of curiosity. Some looked quickly and left without saying anything. Others lingered before the canvases, absorbing the emotions deposited there. An elderly lady, after contemplating a painting that showed a woman emerging from turbulent waters, approached Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "This is exactly how I felt when I finally left my husband after 40 years of a suffocating marriage," she said, holding Eleanor's hands. "How did you know how to paint what was inside me?" That was the first moment when Eleanor realized that her art could be more than personal expression. It could be connection. It could be a mirror for other people who were living their own silent struggles. However, not everything was rosy. Soon appeared the obstacles that Richard had promised. Rumors began to circulate around town. They said Eleanor had abandoned her home without reason, that she was mentally unstable, that the place where she lived with Ryan was inadequate for a child. The hardest blow came when the owner of the town's only commercial plaza refused her request to exhibit some works at a local event. "We don't have space for that kind of art," he said, with a look that made it clear that the problem wasn't the art itself, but who created it. Eleanor returned to the warehouse that day with a weight in her chest. She sat on the improvised mattress and, for the first time since the move, allowed herself to cry. Ryan, who was playing with pudding, approached silently and put his hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Mom. We don't need them." Ryan's simple words brought Eleanor a clarity that no adult reflection could offer. "We don't need them." It was true, they didn't need the approval of a town that preferred to believe rumors rather than know the truth. The next day, Eleanor woke up with a new determination. If she couldn't exhibit at the commercial plaza, she would create her own event. She printed small flyers announcing a special exhibition at her gallery with coffee and homemade cookies. She distributed them in neighboring towns, where Richard's name didn't carry as much weight. Meanwhile, the warehouse continued to transform. A neighboring lady, Mrs. Judy, appeared one morning with homemade curtains for the windows. "To help keep out the cold," she said simply. The next day, her husband, Mr. Anthony, came with tools to fix the leaks. "I can't stand a poorly made roof," he grumbled, as if the repair was more for his own well-being than for Eleanor's. Small gestures of solidarity began to appear. A retired carpenter brought 2 simple but functional beds he had made with leftover wood. A family that had recently moved to town and didn't know the rumors donated a sofa that no longer fit in their living room. The special exhibition attracted more people than Eleanor expected. Among the visitors was Laura, a psychologist who worked in a neighboring town. She spent hours observing the paintings, making notes in a small notebook. "There's a lot of pain here," she finally said, approaching Eleanor, "but also a lot of strength." The two talked at length. Laura said she worked with women in vulnerable situations and saw in Eleanor's paintings a therapeutic potential. "Have you ever thought about using your art as a tool of expression for other women?" she asked. "I know so many who can't verbalize what they feel, but maybe they can paint." The idea planted a seed. In the following weeks, Eleanor and Laura organized an experimental meeting. 5 women, all Laura's patients, gathered at the gallery on a Sunday afternoon. Eleanor provided basic materials and simple guidance. Paint what they were feeling, without concern for technique or aesthetic result. What emerged from that afternoon was transformative. Women who could barely talk about their experiences created powerfully expressive images. A young woman who had suffered violence painted a bird with broken wings, but in the process of healing. An elderly lady who was experiencing prolonged grief created a sunset in shades of purple and gold. A single mother who struggled with depression produced a canvas divided between shadows and light. At the end, they sat in a circle and one by one shared the stories behind the images. There were tears, but also laughter of recognition and relief. Eleanor realized that she had created more than a gallery. She had established a safe space for expression and welcoming. The meetings became regular. Word spread, and more women began to appear. Some came for the art, others for the company, all for the sense of belonging they found there. The group grew, got a name, Colors of Resistance, and began to attract positive attention even from more traditional residents of the town. While the community around the gallery flourished, Ryan also found his way. At 8 years old, he discovered a love for music that no one had predicted. He began to create melodies on an old keyboard donated by one of the group's attendees. His natural ability surprised Eleanor, who saw in her son the same need for artistic expression that she herself felt. On a special day, after selling one of her oldest works to a collector passing through town, Eleanor bought a second-hand guitar for Ryan. The glow in the boy's eyes when he received the instrument was etched in her memory as one of the purest moments of joy she had ever witnessed. "Now I can make real music," he exclaimed, hugging the guitar as if it were an invaluable treasure. The improvised home filled with sound. Ryan practiced tirelessly, learning on his own, watching videos on the internet when he had access, creating his own compositions when he didn't. The melodies that were born from his young hands had a surprising maturity, as if they captured the essence of the experiences that had shaped his childhood. However, not everything was achievement. Richard continued to be a disruptive presence. His visits to Ryan, though spaced out, were loaded with veiled attempts to undermine Eleanor's confidence. Comments like, "This house is still so precarious," or "Your father could give you much more comfort," were frequent, always directed at the boy, never directly at her. On a particularly tense afternoon, Richard appeared without warning, accompanied by a city inspector. "We've come to verify if this location has adequate conditions for commercial operation and habitation," announced the inspector, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Eleanor kept her calm. Over the months, she had regularized everything possible: licenses, permits, electrical and hydraulic installations. She had counted on the help of professionals who attended the group meetings or who simply sympathized with her story. "Feel free to check everything," she replied, handing the inspector a folder with all the documents. The man examined the space and the papers carefully. Richard anxiously awaited some irregularity that could be used against Eleanor. To his frustration, the inspector concluded, "Everything is in order. The space meets the minimum requirements for the type of activity being developed." When they left, Richard gave Eleanor a look that mixed surprise and anger. He hadn't expected her to have been so careful, so resilient. "This isn't over," he muttered before leaving. Eleanor knew it was true. The battle with Richard would probably never have a definitive end, but each small victory strengthened her determination. It was about a year after she left home that the letter arrived. The simple envelope had the handwriting that Eleanor immediately recognized Chloe. For a moment she considered throwing it away unread. The wounds were still open, the betrayal still hurt, but something compelled her to open it. The letter was long, handwritten on several pages. Chloe, now 19 years old and mother to a baby, revealed a version of the story that Eleanor had never considered. She told how Richard had begun to manipulate her subtly, first with small attentions, then with gifts, finally with declarations that Eleanor didn't understand him, didn't truly love him. "I was young and impressionable," wrote Chloe. "He made me believe I was special, that he understood things no one else saw in me. When I realized the trap I had fallen into, it was already too late. I tried to distance myself several times, but he always brought me back with a mixture of emotional blackmail and empty promises." Chloe revealed that Richard had threatened to tell her parents everything, destroying the years-long friendship between the families if she tried to end the relationship. She also mentioned how he had turned Claire against Eleanor with carefully crafted lies. "When you left, he was furious, not because of your absence, but because he had lost control over you. That's when I realized it had never been about love, but about power." The letter ended with a request for forgiveness that didn't demand a response. "I don't expect you to forgive me, nor to welcome me back into your life. I just needed you to know the truth, so that you can move forward knowing that you weren't crazy, weren't imagining things. You were right all along." Eleanor read the letter several times. Each reading brought a new understanding, a new layer of healing. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The letter wasn't an invitation to dialogue, but a confession, a closure. For Eleanor, it was enough. With the passage of time, the New Beginning Gallery gained recognition beyond the borders of the small town. Visitors came from far away to see the exhibitions that Eleanor organized, not only with her own works, but also with creations from the Colors of Resistance group. The art that was born from those meetings was raw, authentic, deeply human. A collector from Phoenix visited the gallery and was so impressed that he commissioned a series of paintings inspired by the theme of overcoming. Another suggested that Eleanor take her works to a contemporary art fair in the capital. At first she hesitated. The idea of distancing herself, even temporarily, from everything she had built frightened her. It was Ryan, now 12 years old, who encouraged her. "Mom, your paintings deserve to be seen by more people. Pudding and I will take care of the gallery while you're away." Eleanor smiled at her son's confidence. The shy boy who had left Richard's house 7 years earlier had transformed into a secure and responsible teenager. His music, like Eleanor's painting, had become a form of processing and expression. "You're right," she agreed. "Maybe it's time to expand our horizons." The art fair was a transformative experience. Eleanor met other artists, critics, gallery owners. Her works were received with enthusiasm, not for being technically perfect, but for carrying an undeniable emotional truth. A museum director, particularly touched by her story and her art, made an invitation that would change her life. "I would like to organize an exhibition focusing on your work, especially those 3 canvases you mentioned, the ones you left behind. When you left home." Eleanor was surprised. She had mentioned those paintings in a casual conversation, without imagining they would arouse so much interest. "I no longer have those canvases. They stayed in my ex-husband's house." "We can try to recover them, with your permission, of course." The idea of revisiting those paintings, silent witnesses to the moment when her life had completely changed, awakened contradictory feelings in Eleanor. On one hand, there was the fear of reopening wounds. On the other, the possibility of closure, of transforming pain into something greater. "Let's try," she finally decided. The museum contacted Richard, offering to buy the paintings. To Eleanor's surprise, he accepted without much resistance. Perhaps time had changed him too, or perhaps he simply no longer wanted those memories in his house. When the 3 canvases arrived at the museum, Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. There they were, exactly as she had left them. The couple in soft tones, the divided face, the fragmented self-portrait. Looking at them now, with the emotional distance that the years had provided, she saw not only the pain that had inspired them, but also the strength that already existed in her, even when she couldn't recognize it. The exhibition was titled Rupture and Reconstruction: Eleanor Wilson's Journey. Besides the 3 original canvases, it included works that documented her journey from that crucial moment to the present. The story behind the paintings was shared sensitively, without names or details that might identify other people involved. On the opening night, the museum was full. Eleanor, wearing a simple dress that she had hand-painted with abstract patterns in shades of blue and gold, observed with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude the people who gathered to see her art, to know her story. Ryan, now a young man of 16, was by her side, holding a guitar. To Eleanor's surprise, he had composed a piece especially for the occasion, a melody that began in minor tones, laden with melancholy, and gradually transformed into something luminous and hopeful. "It's your story, Mom," he explained. From darkness to light. When Ryan played, the entire hall fell silent. The music seemed to give voice to the exhibited canvases, creating an experience that transcended the visual. Many visitors were moved, some openly crying as they walked through the exhibition. A middle-aged woman approached Eleanor after the presentation. Her eyes were red, but her smile was genuine. "I never managed to express what I experienced in my marriage," she said, holding Eleanor's hands. "Your art did that for me. It's as if you had painted my soul." It was just the first of many similar conversations that night. People who had never met shared experiences, recognizing themselves in the images created by Eleanor. Men and women, young and old, all found something that resonated in their own lives. The museum director, visibly moved by the public's response, made a surprising announcement. The museum had decided to permanently acquire the 3 original canvases for its collection. "These works are not only significant from an artistic point of view," he declared, "they represent an important cultural and social testimony. They are documents of a universal human experience. For Eleanor, it was a moment of profound validation. Her pain, her struggle, her journey, everything had been transformed into something greater than herself, something that could touch and help other people. When the exhibition ended and Eleanor returned to her town, something had changed. Not just in how people saw her, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer the woman who abandoned her husband or the eccentric artist from the warehouse. She was Eleanor Wilson, recognized painter, creator of a healing space through art. The New Beginning Gallery gained a new life. With the money from the sale of the paintings and a small grant awarded by a cultural foundation, Eleanor was finally able to make the renovations that the space needed. The roof was completely rebuilt, the electrical installations modernized, the walls insulated against cold and humidity. The Colors of Resistance group evolved into a structured social project with regular workshops, volunteer psychological support coordinated by Laura, and periodic exhibitions that attracted visitors from all over the region. Women of different ages and stories found there not only a space for expression, but also opportunities for learning and, in some cases, a source of income through the sale of their creations. Ryan, encouraged by the success of his presentation at the museum, began to take his music more seriously. He formed a small band with friends from school and started playing at local events. His music, like Eleanor's art, carried an emotional depth unusual for someone so young. "You'll go far with that talent," said Eleanor after watching one of his performances. "Further than this town can offer." Ryan smiled. "I still have time to decide, and wherever I go, I always come back home." Home. The word had a completely new meaning now. It was no longer a place of control and surveillance, but a space of freedom and possibilities. It was during this period of relative stability that an unexpected visit arrived at the gallery. Claire, the old friend who had distanced herself so many years before, appeared on a rainy afternoon, looking nervous and out of place. "May I come in?" she asked, hesitant. Eleanor felt a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, resentment, nostalgia, longing. For a moment she considered refusing her, but something in Claire's eyes, a mixture of regret and hope, made her reconsider. "Of course," she replied, opening the door wider. "Welcome to the New Beginning Gallery." Claire walked slowly through the space, observing the paintings with attention. When she reached the photographs of the Colors of Resistance group in action, she stopped. "I've heard about the work you've been doing here," she commented. "It's impressive. Thank you." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Years of distance and hurt wouldn't disappear with a few polite words. "Eleanor, Claire hesitated, searching for the right words. "I read Chloe's letter. She showed it to me before sending it to you." Eleanor didn't respond. She hadn't expected this development. "It was like a slap in the face," continued Claire, "realizing that all this time you were telling the truth and I simply refused to see." Tears began to stream down Claire's face. Eleanor remained silent, allowing her friend to find her own way through that difficult conversation. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Claire finally said. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, deeply, for not believing you, for allowing that to happen under my roof, for pushing my daughter away from me for so long because of shame and guilt." Eleanor felt something unravel inside her, a knot she had carried for so long, so familiar that she hardly noticed it anymore. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was an opening, a possibility. The beginning of a reconnection that, with time and patience, could evolve into something new. Not the friendship they had had, that was irreparably lost, but perhaps something different based on a deeper and more honest understanding of each other. In the months that followed, Claire began to timidly attend the Colors of Resistance group. At first, she just observed. Then gradually she began to participate. Her first painting showed two hands stretched out, almost touching but separated by a thin red line. "It's how I feel about Chloe," she explained during the sharing. "So close and yet so distant." The group welcomed her pain as it had welcomed so many others. Without judgment, without hasty advice, just genuine listening and solidarity. While the friendship with Claire was slowly rebuilding, Richard continued to be an occasional and complex presence. His visits to Ryan became less frequent as his son grew and developed his own opinions. The teenager, sensitive and observant, had formed his own conclusions about his father. He tried to convince me to live with him again, Ryan told Eleanor, after one of these visits. Said he could pay for a better music school, that I have more opportunities at his house. "And what did you answer?" asked Eleanor, trying not to show the anxiety she felt. "I said I prefer to play in the garage with my friends and live in a place where I can breathe," he replied with a maturity that surprised Eleanor. "It's not about comfort or opportunities, Mum. It's about freedom." Eleanor hugged her son, feeling an overflowing pride. Ryan had understood, on his own, the most important lesson she could teach him. The years passed. Ryan, as predicted, followed his path in music. He went to study composition at a renowned university, returning frequently with new music and stories. Eleanor continued expanding the New Beginning Gallery and the social project, which now served not only women, but anyone in a situation of emotional vulnerability. When the first grey hairs began to appear, Eleanor welcomed them as medals. Each represented a year of life truly lived, each wrinkle a story worth telling. On her 60th birthday, Ryan organized a surprise, a concert with music inspired by his mother's paintings. The event attracted people from various cities, including critics and art appreciators who had followed Eleanor's trajectory over the years. Among those present was Chloe, now a woman in her 40s, accompanied by her teenage son. She and Eleanor had met only once since the letter, in a brief and respectful conversation during an exhibition. They weren't friends, but there was between them a silent understanding, a recognition that they had both been, in different ways, victims of the same manipulation. Life continued to unfold, with its joys and challenges. Eleanor saw Ryan get married, received, with emotion, the news that she would be a grandmother, dedicated herself to teaching art to underprivileged children. Each day was a new brushstroke on an infinite canvas. And now at 78, sitting on the porch of her gallery while her grandson played guitar, Eleanor looked back with a serenity that only age and experience could bring. "Grandma, what do you think when you look at those 3 old paintings in the museum?" asked Matthew, interrupting his melody. Eleanor reflected for a moment. "I see scars," she finally answered. "But do you know what scars are, Matthew? They are marks of wounds that no longer hurt. They are proof that we survived, that we healed." The young man nodded, absorbing the wisdom contained in those simple words. "If I could speak to the woman I was back then," continued Eleanor, "I would tell her that pain doesn't define, but sculpts. That from fracture beauty can be born. That freedom has a price, but it's worth every penny." She paused, observing the sunset that tinged the sky with the same colors she had so often reproduced on her canvases. "But above all, I would tell her that she is not alone. That other women came before, others will come after. That our stories, when shared, become bridges. And that art is the universal language that allows these bridges to exist." Matthew smiled and resumed playing, his fingers creating a melody that seemed to perfectly capture the moment, soft, contemplative, but with an underlying strength that spoke of resilience and hope. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting herself be enveloped by the music. The images of her life passed like a film. The terrified young woman she had been, the determined mother she had become, the recognized artist, the mentor, the friend, the grandmother. All these versions of herself, separated by time, but united by a thread of authenticity and courage. The gallery had transformed over the years, just as she had. What had begun as a desperate refuge had become a space of collective transformation, a living testimony that it is possible to rebuild oneself from one's own pieces. "Grandma," called Matthew again, "I'm composing a new song. It's about new beginnings. I think you'll like it." Eleanor smiled. New beginnings. That was the true art she had mastered throughout life, the ability to start again, to find beauty even in the darkest moments, to transform pain into expression and isolation into community. "I can't wait to hear it," she replied, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the wounds that had become wisdom, for the scars that had sculpted her freedom. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in tones that no artist could ever reproduce with perfection. A new day would come, bringing its own challenges and beauties. And Eleanor would be there, with her brushes and her experience, ready to transform any darkness into light, any pain into art, any ending into a new beginning. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Eleanor's story has touched your hearts and shown that it's always possible to rebuild life, even when everything seems lost. To continue this journey of emotions and overcoming, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the pains of growth, and the beauty of reinvention. Also share in the comments if you have lived or know stories of inspiring new beginnings like Eleanor's.